Grace and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the one who is and who was and who is to come. Bookends to our reading from the book of Revelation today about God's eternality outside of our constructs and constraints of time and space. And the kind of tripartite who was and who is to come occurs a lot in our collects, in our Eucharistic prayer. But perhaps like me, as you read them this week, you realize that the recorder of Revelation changes it up. It's not who was and who is to come. It's the one who is and who was and who is to come. Another grammar lesson by Melinda, maybe, but I think it orients us differently. If you were a first reader of this book, then you were suffering immense persecution. You were suffering enormous strain, and you were doing it for the sake of the gospel. And so what you wanted to know was that it was worth it. That everything that you knew and had understood and put your trust in about Jesus Christ was true. And so the radical symbols of Revelation that maybe don't speak to us in the same way they spoke to our forebears in the faith back in the day, those ancient symbols pointed beyond the seen realm to what was unseen, to a picture that was much bigger, a picture in which the forces of light and dark, good and evil, God and everything other than God, did kind of battle. And God won. God won. And that despite evidence to the contrary, despite persecution and suffering, despite facing death, God is the one who reigns. That God is not confined to the past, and victory of God doesn't have to be assigned to only the future. That in the middle of it, God is. God is reigning. God is reigning because of what God did do. And I think that's why in this opening of the book, the recorder or the divine, however you want to conceive the construct of the book, then goes on to talk about who Jesus is. Because Jesus Christ is reigning because of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ in history. Jesus says in our gospel passage, and our author makes reference to it, that he came to testify to the truth. That Jesus Christ is God incarnate, born in time, to bear witness to the love of God. That though creation chose itself over God and put itself in enmity with one another and all of creation, God said no and came as a person to reveal that God's love bridges all gaps, overcomes all separation. And while the love of God was not popular, and the forces of politics and religion and mobs put Jesus Christ on a cross, and he descended to the grave, he died. But as our prayer says, in doing so, he destroyed death. And when he rose again, he made the whole creation new. Revelation says he has freed us from everything that would enslave us. It is accomplished. It is past, but it makes the reign of God in the present possible. Revelation also says he's the firstborn of the dead, that what Jesus Christ did in coming back to life is the first of what's available for all of humanity. That the promise is on the table that life isn't just this. It's more than you can see. It extends forever in Jesus Christ. We're caught in the web of God's love, in God's embrace forever. It always holds us. Jesus is the firstborn, but the promise is also for us. And that we're a kingdom of priests. It's not usually the language we use, but and they don't really mean this kind of priest. Revelation has in mind the sort of Hebraic model. A priest was someone that was an inherited position. You made sacrifices on behalf of other people, and you were the intermediary. And in Revelation it says, no. It's flattened out. Now everyone has access to God equally. We're all equally inheritors of God's kingdom. We're all within God's love equally. Nothing can separate us from that. And that is a radical kind of love, a radical equality. And that's what the reign of Christ is. The reign of Christ is in Christ's resurrection, which is to say, love is reigning. And that's why I think Jesus says, my kingdom isn't of this world. Pilate wants it to be. And Jesus says, no, I'm not here to set up a new governance structure. I'm certainly not wasting a bunch of money running for office. I'm not going to pull a coup, because my kingdom isn't about that. It's not about a new governance structure. It's about creating an intertwined network of love. Jesus' kingdom is a relational kingdom, not a hierarchical kingdom. It's not of this world because it's not built on the governance structures we expect. It's not about power and who has it and who doesn't. It's about equalizing. It's about everyone being welcomed in the kingdom by God's love. That's what was so threatening about it. Because once you begin to say that everyone is equal before God, then you begin to realize everyone's worthy of dignity. Everyone deserves to flourish. And that has real implications for how we live together, for how we participate in the kingdom by living the love of God. It means we go out and we care about the well-being of our neighbor equal to our own well-being. In fact, in some instances, we set our own self-orientation aside to love and care for others, as Jesus has loved and cared for us. And that means that actually this kingdom is radically participatory. Most governance structures, I know we vote, but sometimes you feel pretty powerless. Yeah, your vote counts, okay. But God's kingdom isn't about that. You participate in it every time you choose love. Every time you choose to care about someone. Every time you work for peace and step out against violence and care about justice. Those are the markers of God's kingdom. We're all invited to participate in it by loving one another. And it doesn't have a geography. It's extending all over, through all of time, through all of us. You don't have to be a king. You don't have to run for office. You can work right now in your own midst to work love. Now, perhaps some of us are called to those things, to run for office, to do these things to make life better, but each of us in our own sphere is called to love. And every time we do that, we name Jesus as king. We participate in the reign of God. It's difficult to see, but do we believe it? Do we trust it more than what our eyes tell us? Because the kingdoms of the world, they can seem all kinds of troubled and intransigent and like nothing ever changes. But do we really believe that Jesus is reigning? Because if we do, then we know that God is working through every one of us and every single person across the world who participates in love. No act of love does not change the world. But do we believe that love wins? Do we really believe that by going out and caring enough about our friends and neighbors and getting involved in loving them, whether that means giving them a coat or a cup of food, or it means working for policies that help raise them out of poverty, do we really believe that love wins? Because that's what Christ the King Sunday asks us to believe. It asks us not to bow to all the kingdoms of the earth, not to put our whole heart in the politics of now, but to believe that through all of it, God is. Christ is reigning. And his kingdom of relationship and participation is a doors open, everybody invited. And by participating, we too change the world. We too show people what it looks like to be the firstborn of the dead, to testify to the truth. And so may this Sunday remind us that we are citizens of two kinds of worlds. We all hold citizenship somewhere on this planet, most likely looking out, American citizenship. We're also all citizens of the kingdom. We're brothers and sisters in that kingdom. And the question is, which one holds our allegiance strongest? May we trust that God is, and God was, and God will be, enough to participate in God's loving reign, to go out and trust that we can too participate in Christ's kingdom, now and forever.